game plan for single raise pot IP against regs. Let's go. So I'm gonna give you guys some ideas and guidelines on how to play single raise pots IP against regulars, and what we're gonna be the most interested here is have an understanding of how we're going to approach each street, and also which bet size we're typically gonna use, and anything that is going to be relevant to the application of our strategies. Okay, so I'm gonna start here showing you guys data on flop C betting, then I'm gonna show you guys data on turn double barrel, and also turn delay C bet. Those are the three most important lines you're gonna play as the aggressor in single raise pots in position. Okay, so here we have the frequencies for the sims that I use personally in my own game. Okay, so I'm not gonna be showing you guys sims that I don't use. I'm gonna show you guys data from sims that I actually use to study and improve my game. And these sims are optimized trees. I built these by myself with my own algorithm for optimizing trees. So basically here the idea is to play the highest EV one size strategy for all the flop and turn nodes, because that's how I think you should approach poker. Okay, so here you guys are going to see that I have basically three sizing options. I have quarter pot that I use, I have half pot, let's see, yeah, we have one half pot here, and I also have pot. Those are the three sizes that I use as flop C bets. Those are not very common. There are very few regs that use these exact bet sizings. And to be honest, it's not a problem if you use different bet sizes, okay? The idea here is that you need to have one small size, one medium size, and one large size. That's it. You need to have three sizes in your strategy. One small, one medium, one large. The small can be something like from a min bet to a 33% bet, right? That's the threshold for a small bet size. A medium bet size can be half pot to something like 2/3 pot, maybe 3/4 pot, okay? And then a big bet size, it's gonna be something from pot to 1.5x pot. If you wanna play 27% as a small size, 55% as the medium size, and 110% as the big size, that's no problem at all. It's just that you need your sizes to be significantly spaced out. You don't wanna have 33%, then half pot, and then 3/4 pot. Those are not significantly spaced out, which means you're not targeting as many hands from your opponent's range. Okay, so make sure that whichever sizes you pick, that they are significantly spaced out, and I like to increase my sizings geometrically. So in my game plan post-flop, I have 12%, 25, 50, pot, and 2x pot. You see that my sizings, they grow geometrically. You can just multiply the sizes by 2, and you get the next sizing. So this gives me a big scope of hands that I can target in my opponent's range. Okay, you don't have to copy me, but make sure you have at least three sizes for your flop C bets and that those are significantly spaced out. And here's you guys going to see some significant patterns. So basically, most of the boards are going to bet small, and then there are going to be a few exceptions. So it's smarter for you to learn the exceptions rather than focus on, well, what is the rule? The rule is that you're going to be betting small on most boards, and then there are going to be some boards where you're going to be sizing up. And the boards where you're going to be betting pot, they are very specific. You can see them here. So what are the boards that you're not going to be sizing down? You're going to be sizing up to pot, and the solver actually bets bigger than this. But again, you don't have to be like obsessed with the exact sizing you use on the flop, because that's not the most important thing. So on ace king 5, if you solve on GTO wizard, solver probably uses bigger than pot. Okay, so if you want to use 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, that's not a problem, as long as you have a sim that you can study and that you can build your strategy for further streets. Okay, so what are the exceptions to the rule of betting small? Well, typically double Broadway two-tone boards. Double Broadway two-tone boards are going to be low frequency, big size strategy boards. Okay, and this is valid for button versus big blind, cutoff versus big blind, and hijack versus big blind. You can see here, ace king 5, ace king 3, they are low, kind of lowish frequency for the button, medium frequency from the cutoff, and then the frequency increases in the hijack. You can see this effect here. That's pretty cool to have all of these tables together, because you can see this effect, right? So double Broadway two-tone boards. You can see here queen 10 5, queen 10 4 two-tone. It's also going to be pot bet. We have the same effect here from cutoff. And then from the hijack, you can actually shift to a range bet for a small size due to how strong your range is. We also have low boards with a lot of straight draws available, okay? So for example, you have a board like 9-8-3 two-tone. This is a really great board for you to size up because here you want to deny equity to your opponent's many overcards with backdoors. But at the same time, villain doesn't have all too many nuts, right? He doesn't have too many two pairs, he doesn't have too many sets. So by betting big, you get rid of all those hands with significant decent equity to outdraw you. And then your overpairs are going to retain a lot of equity versus calling range, right? Your opponent's going to call a lot of one-pair hands, 9x, 8x, and then your overpairs are going to retain a lot of equity. So this is a really good bet sizing to use on these low boards with a lot of straight draws available. So 9-8-3, you can see here 9-4-3 on the button. On the other positions, you can use another bet sizing. You can see here the impact of the strength of your range. You can see that hijack versus big blind, we're c-betting way more often, right? Take a look at those bars. We can see that we're c-betting way more often hijack versus big blind. This is simply because once we open from the hijack for a min raise, which is the GTO sizing from the hijack, the big blind is actually going to call a wider range against our min raise from the hijack than he calls against the button 2.5x. Okay, that's why we c-bet more often from the hijack. Our range is stronger and our opponent's range is weaker. So you can see this effect here in the c-bet strategies. So double Broadway, two-tone boards, low boards with lots of straight draws. You can also put in there some jack high boards. So jack is not necessarily a low card, but given that it has 3 overcards still, the queen, the king, and the ace, you can put it in the same category. So you can see here, jack 8-3 two-tone, how we're going to play it. We're going to bomb it, we're going to bet big. Jack 8-5, this one is not a flush draw, but it still also makes it a lot of straight draws available. So from the hijack and from the cutoff, we're going to bet big. From the button, you can use a half pot sizing or a pot sizing. I think both are fine, but we can see here that on the sim, it's selected to use the half pot sizing. You can see jack 9-6 two-tone, lots of straight draws available here, but it doesn't have a straight possible, right? This is important. You can see here, bet big with a medium frequency. All right, and what are the boards that we're going to use the medium bet size? The medium bet size are going to be the boards that, you know, small size is not all that great because it doesn't deny equity to the overcards, but pot is also excessive because it's not like you really want to put all that much money into the pot, and it's not like you need all that much protection with your strong hands, right? So in the rainbow varieties, you can see that solver is going to utilize half pot. So half pot here on 9-5-4 rainbow. Another example are the boards that have straights possible. So these are boards where you can use a medium size. It can be half pot, as I said, or it can be 2/3 if you want, 3/4, doesn't matter. So 10-7-6 is a board that has straights possible. So you're not going to bet small because that's useless on a board like this. Your opponent's range is going to have like any hand has kind of a piece here, right? You don't really deny any equity by betting small, but at the same time, you don't want to bet huge on this type of board because he has a straight available, and then that makes equities run closer. Once you start putting too much money into the pot, you kind of isolate yourself against top of your opponent's range. All right, so you can see here half pot sizing being utilized here. Let's see if there's another example. Yeah, here on this list we don't have other examples, but it's basically the same idea every time. Okay, boards that have straight available, you just go ahead and use the half pot sizing. Now when you take a look at all of the other boards, you're just going to be using a small size. Some boards more often than others, right? The more disconnected the board is, the higher the frequency you're going to use. And you just have to be careful with some ace high boards. Some ace high boards, they're really tricky to play. It might seem like they are high frequency bet boards, but they're not. Okay, so for example, ace high with 2 low cards. Those are actually not great boards for you to bet super high frequency because the big blind is going to connect a lot with the low card region, right? They're going to have all of the pocket pairs, but they're also going to have straights. For example, here, the big blind is going to have 3 deuce suited in his range, and they're also going to have lots of pair plus draw type hands, right? So 4 deuce suited, 4-3 suited, 5-3 suited, 5 deuce suited, a bunch of those suited low cards. So these boards, you can see that the frequency is actually medium, kind of like 50-50, 50% bet, 50% check. And you can see that we actually see bet less on the hijack than on the button, simply because once we open for a min raise from the hijack, the big blind actually has more of those low suited cards. Okay, so ace high boards with 2 low cards, those are the only tricky boards for you to play with the small size. I should actually mention the monotone boards as well. Monotone boards, especially the high card monotone boards, are not all that great for you to be ultra aggressive as well. Okay, so keep an eye on those boards. You can see here, Jack 8-7 monotone, small size, medium-ish frequency. You can see also the low paired boards. So low paired boards, we can see bet decent amount, but not range. It's really easy for people to over c-bet in these boards. So you can see 3-3 deuce. You can't just c-bet range on this board. Of course, we can say that, oh, most opponents are not going to check raise enough. Maybe they're going to overfold. But I'm giving you guys advice here on solid strategies, okay? Strategies that you can apply against anyone. If you realize that your opponent is overfolding under raising, then yeah, for sure, you can expand your c-bet range. But I'm giving you guys here understanding of the baseline strategy. And on low paired boards, you cannot afford to be c-betting way too much because you're just going to be getting check raised and you're going to lose what you invested. That's why you don't check raise all that much on these boards. Okay, so you can see low paired boards, got to be careful. Monotone boards, as I said, be careful not to c-bet too much. And that ace high boards with 2 low cards, those are the boards where when we're c-betting small, we have to be a little bit careful. Okay, and then we have the patterns for the boards where we size up and the patterns for the boards where we bet medium. As I said, mostly boards with a straight available or disconnected boards with low cards where we don't want to bet too small because that doesn't deny equity, but we also don't want to bet too huge. So those are the main patterns you guys are going to see. Okay, and then you guys are going to be able to study this. You just pause the video and study these grids if you want to see something specific about it. Okay, but the patterns are very stable throughout the positions. Of course, one thing here and there changes between the positions, but even the composition of the ranges, the strategies are very similar. Typically speaking, we're just more aggressive from the hijack because hijacking under the gun is not here, but it's pretty much the same range. Because our range is stronger and our opponent's range is weaker, so we see bet at a higher frequency, and sometimes we increase the bet sizing from one board, from one position to the other. Maybe on a board that we would bet 25%, we bet half pot. Maybe on a board that we would bet half pot, we bet full pot. Okay, so that's the basic idea here of flop c-betting. Next, it's time for us to talk about turn double barrel. Now things get really interesting because we have lots and lots of possibilities, right? Here we have all the flop boards from that previous spreadsheet, but we can change the turn cards and see how the strategies change for ourselves. Again, here, the bet sizes you're gonna have are one medium. Actually, there is a difference. You're gonna have a medium, a large, and a very large now. So basically, as the double barrel, you're not going to have a small size. Solver almost never uses. There are actually a very few examples where Solver uses like monotone boards, sometimes some paired boards with Solver double barrels with the small size, but it's almost non-existent in the GTO solutions. So you can completely skip that, and you're going to use a medium bet size, a large bet size, and a very large bet size. So again, medium, something like half pot to 3/4 pot. That's it. Large bet size, something like pot to 1.2, 1.3, 1.5x pot. And then very large, something like 2x pot or larger, okay? Or maybe something like 1.7x pot sometimes people use as well. I think GTO Wizard Sims have 1.75x pot, so you can consider that as very large, okay? As I said, I personally use half pot, pot, and 2x pot. So what are the patterns for using these different bet sizings, okay? Turns are really like, it's very obvious which bet sizing you should pick on turns. Like if you spend a few minutes studying, you're going to see that it's all very straightforward. So for example, on the boards where you're already polarizing the flop, so these are the double Broadway two-tone boards that we mentioned before, right? So imagine a board like Ace King 5 two-tone. We saw before that on this board, we're gonna bet pot on the flop. Cool. So we bet pot on the flop, and let's imagine the turn is a complete blank. Let's say the 6 of diamonds. What are we going to do in the 6 of diamonds? We're going to continue betting pot. Okay, this is a very good sizing of this type of texture because it is almost exactly the geometric sizing for this board texture, the sizing that increases the pot geometrically. I think the true geometrical sizing here would be something like 1.2x. So if you bet 1.2x on the flop, 1.2x on the turn, you're going to be able to go all in on the river exactly with 1.2x pot bet. So that's a geometric sizing. It grows the pot geometrically. Okay, so pot is very close to that. So if you bet pot on the flop, turns a blank, you just go ahead and continue betting pot. Now, what are the runouts where you're actually going to be sizing down here? Well, take a guess. Let's say the turn is a spade. What are you going to do on a turn that is a spade? You're going to size down. You see here that the frequency drops and our turn sizing drops to 50%. That's really obvious, right? Because now both ranges have a lot of nuts. You don't want to go huge, betting huge in a spot where your opponent is completely uncapped. We bet big on ace king 5 because we have a significantly advantage and we want to target our opponent's top pairs and second pairs on the flop already. But then once the flush hits, basically we have to be careful now and we size down to the half pot sizing. So you can see here when the spade completes, we size down to half pot, okay? Another very common pattern where you're going to utilize the half pot sizing is when the turn pairs the board, right? So for example, you have king 10-4 rainbow here. And on king 10-4, we're going to be betting small with a very high frequency, almost range on the flop. But then if the turn is, let's say, a 10 of spades, what are we going to do? We're going to use the half pot sizing with a medium-ish, lowish frequency. Okay, again, these are cards that uncap both ranges. Both ranges are going to have a lot of strong hands. And in those situations, you don't really have any leverage. You can't really put too much money into the pot because you don't have a significant advantage in the strongest region. Okay, so basically, once your opponent has a lot of potential nutted hands, you're gonna have to target a lower level of hands in his range. So what do I mean by this? Basically, bet sizings are tools for you to target a specific region of your opponent's range. Pay attention to what I'm gonna say next. Maximizing your EV is the same thing as minimizing your opponent's EV, right? Because poker is a zero-sum game. So maximizing your EV, which is what you want, is exactly the same thing as minimizing your opponent's EV. Those are exactly the same things. Cool. Once you understand this, you're going to realize that by betting a certain size, you can think of it as maximizing the EV of your range, or you can think of betting a certain size as the action of minimizing the EV of your opponent's range, right? So your bet sizing, you can think of it, and you should think of it as a tool to minimize the EV of a certain region of your opponent's range. You can't minimize the EV of all regions of your opponent's range, right? You can't take the entire pot for you and your opponent has nothing. It's never going to happen. You're never going to have a range that is strong enough for that to happen. So you're always targeting a certain region of your opponent's range. Once your opponent's range contains a lot of nutty hands, you have to target a lower level of hands in his range, and that's why we're going to be sizing down here. Okay, so when the turn comes at 10, you can't target a 10. That's insane. You can't make a 10 indifferent. You can't target a king because that's top pair. So basically here, we're targeting 4x, we're targeting pocket pairs, we're targeting some gut shots. We're trying to make those hands indifferent, right? Because that's the best we can do with the strength of our range relative to the strength of our opponent's range. So that's a very in-depth theoretical explanation of why you would want to pick a lower bet sizing in those types of runouts, okay? So flush completing turn, you're going to want to size down. A pairing turn, you're going to want to size down like you can see here. Okay, this is all, as I said, it's relatively straightforward in my opinion if you really think about it. Okay, so queen 7-5 rainbow, you're going to bet small on the flop. And then if the turn comes, the queen of hearts, on this one we're actually betting pot because the range is sufficiently strong. Let's see on the 7. On the 7 we go half. Okay, so you can see that there's some differences. Sometimes maybe the card that pairs the board is still a card that still favors us a little bit and we can afford to bet bigger, but on a 7, for example, we just go ahead and we size down, right? So very straightforward. Now, what are the situations where we're going to be using the very large sizing? The very large sizing, it is very specific to high card boards where you have a lot of advantage and on boards where you bet small on the flop, because once you bet big on the flop, you don't have to bet 2x pot, 1.8x pot on the turn. That's almost never the most appropriate bet sizing because of the SPR. Now, if you bet small the flop, meaning that the pot didn't grow so much, and then you have a huge SPR and you still have a very significant advantage, then you're going to want to use a very large bet sizing, 1.7, 1.8, 2x pot bet sizing, okay? So what is a clear example of this? Ace high dry boards, and then the turn comes a very high card, like a king or a queen. So take a look at what happens on ace 7-3 when the queen of clubs comes. When the queen of clubs comes, what are you going to do? You're going to bet 2x pot. You're going to bomb into the spot, okay? You have the advantage. Your opponent is very capped in this spot. He doesn't have ace queen or shouldn't have. He's not going to have many 7s and 3s for not raising the flop. And you have all of that advantage. You're going to bomb into the spot, okay? So 2x pot here. The same is going to happen on a king of spades, for example. So king of spades, you can see 2x pot with a relatively low frequency. Okay, so that's the most common heuristic for the utilization of these bet sizes in these spots. What else we should mention here? We should mention also the double barrel strategy. Oh yeah, on straight completing turns, we can talk about that. So for example, you have, yeah, that's actually not the best example. Let me think of a good example here. Oh, of course, 4 to straight turn. So let's say you have a board like Queen Jack 9, and then the turn comes an 8. Let's say the 8 of clubs or 8 of diamonds. That's okay. What are you going to do? You're going to bet half pot. Again, the idea here is that the ranges contain a lot of nutty hands, and you have to target a lower region, a region of weaker hands from your opponent's range. Okay, that's the idea here for the double barrel line. Now, paired boards are also important, so let's talk about paired boards. Paired boards are almost never going to use the very large bet sizing, the 2x. So you're basically going to be either with the medium bet size, the double barrel line, or sometimes with the pot sizing. The good thing about low boards is that when a high card comes, it still makes sense for you to bet quite a lot of middling straight hands. So maybe I'm going to show you guys some examples of that too. So let's say 8-8-7 board, and then the turn comes a king. Let's say a king. Yeah, it can be any king, king of hearts. So when the turn comes a king, take a look what happens. We bet half pot with a relatively high frequency, something like 62-63%. That's a very high frequency for a double barrel spot, okay? It's not very common for us to double barrel more than 60% of our range. So the idea here is that you're going to continue barreling with a lot of middling straight hands. You're going to continue battling here with a 7. You're going to continue barreling here sometimes the pocket 6s. And of course, all of the pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, right? So these spots are really nice for you to continue betting with the depolarized strategy because your opponent's range is very weak, but it still contains those overcards that your pocket pairs and middling straight hands would benefit from getting protection. So that's another pattern that you can use to use the depolarized sizing, the smaller medium bet size, because on those high cards, you still have incentive to bet with those middling hands, okay? And then guys, everything else is just a standard pot size, okay? The pot size is going to be the most often used, and basically you use the pot size, and then on the exceptions, which are the 2x pot and the 50% pot size with the patterns that we mentioned, that's when you're going to use those. So basically, high card boards where you bet small on the flop and then the turn is a very high card, doesn't complete a straight, so you have all of that advantage, you bomb into the pot, the SPR is very high. And then all the situations where flush completes the turn, pair turn, so a pair card on the turn. And when you have situations like this, where you have a low board and then a high card comes, where you still want to bet those middling straight hands, those are the situations where you want to bet with the smaller size, okay? So those are the most important heuristics for the double barrel line. Now, finally, let's talk about the lazy bet line. So the lazy bet line, typically speaking, in theory, you should be using mostly small and medium bet sizes. You're almost never going to see solver. You can see here from the color of the bar charts that you're almost never going to be using, or very infrequently going to be using, very large bet sizings. Okay, the idea here is simply that once you check back the flop, your range is not as strong anymore, right? So you cannot afford to have all that many big bets. Of course, on some boards, you're going to still do it because it doesn't make sense for it to size down with the range structure, but most of the time you're going to be using small to medium bet sizes. Okay, so what are the exceptions where you are going to be using some large bets? Well, let's take a look at here. For example, if you are on a board like 9-8-3 two-tone, which is a board where you're going to bet big on the flop, and then the turn comes a blank, well, you're going to continue. It's basically the same structure, right? The same structure that you had on the flop, you continue to have that on the turn. And we have to mention that on these flops, you have to check back some of your overpairs. You can't just see bet all of your overpairs. So particularly aces and kings, you're going to be checking back a little bit for balance. So you still have the same structure. You still have a lot of 9x plus in bluffs, and then you want to make your opponent fold those overcards and retain equity against their one pair hands. So you can see here that on these boards, when the turn is a blank, you're going to do the big sizing. We can take a look, for example, at some ace king X boards. Let's take a look at maybe a turn like the 7 of hearts. Well, the 7 of hearts, we're still using the half pot. So the only board here where we're using a significant amount of pot bets is this ace 10-8. We have a little bit on this king 8-6. So let's see which boards we're using here. I would imagine it's probably on the boards high cards bringing more draws. So let's say Queen of Spades. Yeah. So on the Queen of Spades, we're using the pot sizing. On the Ace of Spades, I would imagine as well. Let's see the Ace of Spades. On the Jack of Spades, maybe. On the Jack of Spades, we're still using it. Let's say the 10 of Spades, we're still using it. And then on the 9 of Spades, it might be where we start sizing down. Yeah, exactly. So you see on the 9 of Spades, now a straight is available. A straight is available for the out of position player. A lot of offsuit pairs as well are available. So 9-8 offsuits, King 9 offsuits. So you see we size down to the half pot. So very similar structure, very similar patterns from the flop c-bet. Once you understand, once you can see that the ranges retain the structure from the flop, you can apply the same principles from the flop. Okay, so straight completed, we're going to size down. High card boards where we have advantage, we're going to size up. And then we're going to have a lot of spots where we're going to be using small bet sizes, particularly on these low paired boards. On these low paired boards, we're going to be using a lot of protection bets with ace highs and just very weak hands overall, right? So on 6-6 deuce, if the turn comes something like an 8 of clubs, you're going to see the solver betting small with hands like ace queen, ace jack, perhaps even ace 10. Okay, you just want to have a lot of those thin value protection bets on these low paired boards, so the lazy betting is typically small here. On paired cards, it's also typically small, particularly on boards where there are not all that many draws available. So for example, let's see here, 5 of hearts. So you see Jack 8-5, and then turn comes the 5 of hearts. What is the size that we're going to use? The small size. The small size. We want to target some ace highs. We want to target some lower pairs. That's what we want to do. We do have a lot of hands to target that region. We have those pocket 9s, pocket 7s here to target those lower pocket pairs and ace highs. So we're going to do that. But let's say the turn was the 3 of spades. So when the turn is the 3 of spades, what do? We size up to the medium bet size. Our range is still not strong enough to go for the pot size because we're going to leave a lot of our strongest hands on the flop. But we do size up here on the 3 of spades. So you can see these patterns of bet sizing. And here, remember that against the bottom of the pool, you want to play the lazy bet extremely aggressive, okay? I'm giving you guys general guidelines from balance strategies, but remember that against the bottom of the player pool, you want to play this continued aggression lines very, very aggressive. And here, I would just shift all my mixed strategies towards pure bets, and I would potentially even play a strategy that bets all unpaired hands. Betting all of your unpaired hands is a really good strategy. It's a really good exploit against the player pool, against how most people play this node. Okay, so you should be rarely giving up here with unpaired hands, unless it's like an ace, king, ace, queen type hand that you can just check back and call bluffs with, which is also a very good strategy. But other than that, most of the time, you should be betting the spot. Okay, so that's it for this video. A quick overview on how to approach single-raise pot IP against regs. In next video, we're going to talk about single-raise pot out of position. See you there.